So, like, I have, like, a LED light and it's, like, blinding me, so... Yeah. But anyway, today we're going to be reacting to True Scary Story Animation Compilation number 2. Now, I haven't done number 1 yet, but I couldn't find it anywhere, so... I need, like, a stick coming thin underneath it. Lighting. Okay, that's perfect lighting. Okay, boom, boom, boom. Let's get started.
I've always had a innate fear of the night.
So
Not so
have
much the
I.
dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on, until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night, the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m.
His friends just like
Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house.
Bro, you better get
It was a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you finally decide to just run it. So, of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week I had heard the phrase, character is what you do when no one is looking, and for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out of my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and that all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me so I could just get out of there. But I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag, and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her and she mentioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said,
"My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?"
I should stop and give you a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and kind of an indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or she was 60-something years old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, like she was disconnected for the moment. That made my skin crawl.
I would have said,
and after a
no.
brief, maybe about a second debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and that I couldn't give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again.
"My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?"
This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again.
"My boyfriend beat me up."
At this point, the light changed and I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since.
"You made the right decision."
Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were more people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark.
I agree. once all the cookies were gone, when I freaking was hungry. And it was after dark.
I was on an equestrian team throughout middle school with about 9 other girls. My coach's name was Deborah, and one of the most awesome things about Deborah was that she'd always take our teams on reward trips or events. Trips included outings such as movies, water park dates, or just barn sleepovers. This particular trip was a trail ride overnight. We were ecstatic as trail overnights were only a summer thing, and it was one of the first ones of the year. Basically, a trail overnight was a weekend that we would go on a 3-day-long trail ride. We'd pack a bag or two, meet up on Friday morning at the stable, load up our horses and bags into the 3 trailers, and be on our way. That was exactly how it happened this particular trip. Everything went exactly as it should have, and we set off to a trail near the Sleeping Bear Dunes, as I live in rural Michigan. Things got odd a few hours into the trip. We had all left at about 7 in the morning, so that left us with plenty of daylight to do fun stuff after we got settled into the campsite. Deb had us all saddle up to go along the Lakeshore Trail. Once everyone was in the saddle, we set off on a narrow, single-file-only trail that wound through some woods and eventually would lead us to an overlook of the beach. I was completely in my zone. My horse, Aries, was not. It was like he and a few other horses were sensing something that nobody else did. But we chalked it up to being in a new place that we had never camped before. Being that Aries was a Mustang, I thought maybe his wild instincts were kicking in after a few years of being domesticated as well. At about 7 o'clock that evening, while Deb and the stable hand Carla cooked up hot dogs and the rest of us had to come back from swimming, I decided to take Aries out for a quick trot and a loop around the campsite in hopes to calm him down. I grabbed my helmet and mounted up, not bothering to grab reins or saddle up, and just tied the lead rope to the other side of his halter. The ride went how I expected it to, with Aries acting up. Although this time his behavior was different. He didn't just seem agitated, he seemed distressed, like something was really scaring him. I looked around and couldn't see a thing. No deer, no bears, no other horseback riders or mountain bikers or anything. I decided to go down a little trail that would wind back up at the campsite after about 5 minutes rather than just going in a loop. This is where it hit the fan. We had been going for about 2 minutes on this little trail when I started feeling funny, like we were being watched. I turned around and nobody was there. At one point of the trail, we came across a big boulder, and this was where Aries stopped completely. No amount of nudging or encouragement budged him. He absolutely refused to go any further. I slid off his back and tried pulling him to no avail. That's when I noticed where his eyes were focused. He wasn't looking at me, but over my shoulder. Slowly, I turned around and saw a tall, dark figure about 50 yards away, maybe less, standing ahead of us on the trail, not moving, even though I'm sure he heard us. I didn't know what to do. Was he a hiker? It was obviously a man, but he had no pack, no bike, nothing. He was holding something in his hand, though.
Probably big.
A walking stick, maybe. I didn't want to bother him or go near him, as his presence had given me the creeps. I whispered to Aries that we were going back, and slowly climbed on. As soon as I was situated and I looked back at the man, though, my heart dropped. The figure had turned towards us, watching. I could tell because I could faintly make out the zipper of his jacket. There was no doubt he had seen and heard us, so there was no point in trying to be subtle. I offered a wave, trying to signal I was out of there and wouldn't be a bother. Aries was more than happy to oblige. When I looked back again, my heart dropped even further and I froze. The figure was getting larger. The man was chasing us, running at full speed. I saw what was in his hand, a machete? It couldn't be, but it sure looked like some kind of weapon. I said Aries' name loudly in fear, and he knew what I wanted. He kicked into overdrive as the man had caught up to about 10 yards away from us. Mustangs are fast, and Aries was no exception. That made hanging on without a saddle a bit difficult, but I somehow knew that if I fell, my life was over. And just my luck, I did fall. Aries had put some distance between us and the man to where I could no longer hear or see him, but it didn't take long for the machete guy to come within hearing range. The man came up over the hill of the trail and spotted me immediately. I knew I was doomed. The man started towards me, and before I could bolt, I heard the thundering sound of hooves speeding in my direction. The man, although I couldn't see his face beneath the hood of his jacket, I could tell he was looking behind me. I turned too and had to dive out of the way. Aries was speeding towards the man in like a freight train. I couldn't believe what I saw. Before the guy could dive out of the way, Aries struck him with full force and trampled him, making the guy yell out in pain. He lay there limply. More than likely a bone or two was broken. Aries was big for a Mustang, and being hit and run over by any horse isn't going to leave you without injury. Aries disappeared over the hill for a second, then came back and ran the man over a second time. He stopped long enough for me to scramble onto his back, and we sped to the campsite. I told Deb and the rest of the group that we needed to call the police and get the hell out of there. As soon as I told Deb, she had us pack our stuff up and get in the trailer and trucks while she called the police. They didn't take too long to arrive, as there were usually some scouting around the area we were in. I told them everything that had happened, and that the man may still be laying where we had left him because Aries had trampled him pretty badly. We didn't stick around long enough to find out, but we learned that the guy I had encountered had previously been arrested for assault with intent to kill. How he had gotten into the woods, I'll never have any clue. I do know that I owe my life to my horse, as I wouldn't be here to tell this story had I not been with him. People say horses are dumb animals, but I think Mustangs are different. I think if Aries had not been wild before, he wouldn't have been able to recognize the threat. Anyway, that's my story. If there are any fellow riders out there, or even just hikers or mountain bikers, whatever you might do on the trail, I recommend you don't go do it alone.
Okay guys, we're gonna watch one more and then I guess this video will be finished. Also, if you like this video,
When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She had even printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I mean, I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this really creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and then she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say something like, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would just give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again, and every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name.
Max. Max. Max.
Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out, and it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was extremely riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and she yelled that she'll slit his fucking throat. That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. I mean, she was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in the house with her. And what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as like a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw that one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot.
What happens if she had like a crazy twin or something, right? And like the twin was at the door. I bet you that's what I'm gonna.
And moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on. And to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly crept into my room and slit my throat?
Just me.
It freaks me out.
Okay. That gave me chills. Like, ugh. My legs just went buzz. Like that. That was scary. Anyway, guys, if you guys liked this video, make sure to give it a like, as I said, and I will do a part 2, and I will do 3. Because I have a rule. It's the rule of 3. Each video will have 3 mini short films if I'm doing True Scary animations. So, yes. So, bye, guys. Hope you guys have an amazing day or night. So, bye.